Okay. Now, if you're looking at the handout that I sent you, where if you have the whole the slides versus the note slides, then if you have the note slides, you'll notice something missing. Anybody notice what's missing on the first slide? What?
First part of that.
I can't hear.
First part of that.
First part of the alphabet. Yeah, yeah. So apparently my cut and paste didn't paste. However, I added it to. Okay. Let me go fix this real quick because it shouldn't be that way. I added it, and then ultimately I didn't put it back into presentation mode. There. So if you don't have it in front of you, I mean, you probably have it memorized already, so we could turn this off, right? Everybody have it memorized? Let's walk through this together, okay? I'm going to start. Let's go. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mim, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Sadeh, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and Tav. Everybody kind of feeling a little bit more relaxed? I mean, I know you don't have it memorized unless you spend, it's not a grammar class, okay? So I'm not asking you to memorize it. If we take Hebrew, you're going to memorize it. But you want to know it to where you can pronounce it. Now, you may have to look something up and go back to your notes and stuff, and you may be really slow, but you want to know it so that you can communicate, but especially so that you can read. You know, someone who writes a text that has some information that you want to access. So, but let's not forget, of course, there are the final forms, 5 of the letters, the Kaf, the Mim, the Nun, the Pei, and the Sadeh all have a final form. In other words, the last letter, when it appears as the last letter of a word, is basically going to straighten itself out, except for the Mim is going to square itself up, and the others are going to straighten themselves out. And normally it'll be a little longer than the other letters associated with it. And also our alphabet, or excuse me, our volumes, which actually they're volume, the vowels, the pointing system. Oh, did I skip one? I did. Okay, I see what I did. All right, and let's not forget our Gat Kafat letters. Now that's just these 6 letters: the Beit, the Gimel, the Dalet, the Kaf, the Pei, and the Tav. And if there's a dot in it, it's one of 2 things. It's a dogish lane, which basically is just telling you how to pronounce it. It's a soft letter or a hard sound, either one of the 2. So it's either B or V for the Beit. It's either G as in God or as in August. August. How do you pronounce that? August. Yeah, so like ghost. You know, so either hard or soft sound on these when it appears in the dot. The dot appears in there. Now, normally that's what you can just assume. Okay, there are other times when it's going to have the dogish forte in it. Dogish forte will, and there are clues for that, so it's not too hard to figure out once you know the clues. But that's for a Hebrew class. We won't go into it tonight. And let's not forget, of course, there are the gutturals, 4 gutturals, and sometimes resh, the aleph, the hey, the chet, and the ayin. Now, the aleph and the ayin doesn't really have a sound, so it's not like you're sounding the guttural in the back of your throat. The hey and the chet, I don't have enough saliva in me tonight. But they do make a difference in knowing what they are. When you start to see, especially when we get to verbs, and verbs will have what letters are the Hebrew letters either called strong or weak. They're strong or they're weak, right? I mean, so you have some letters most letters are strong. Strong means they're really not going to change. Weak means it's subject to change. And so when we get to the verbs, ultimately we see a lot of changes where these weak letters are. Especially the gutturals. They're the weak letters. They're basically the weak link. The hey especially. The yod also is a weak one. The vav is a weak one, and they're not part of the gutturals, but these gutturals, aleph is definitely weak one, and the ayin is a weak one, and the hey. Tav is not so weak, and resh is not so weak, but the others are. And let's not forget our pointing system, our vowels, and you can look at this multiple ways. Basically, you have your A, E, I, O, U vowels, and so your A vowels would be the kamech, the parak, and the hatef parak. The difference between them would be how long you allow the air, how long you pronounce the sound. So the kamech is a longer sound; it's a long A. So it's ba. The parak is a little bit shorter. It's the same basic sound. It's ba, just a little bit shorter. And of course, it's called the reduced vowel or the hatef parak. It's just even shorter. It's ba. And basically just really how long you're making the sound. And the same thing with the E vowel, the setter A, the segol, and the hatef segol. It's it's more of the A sound. Bay, and segol is a little bit more of an E. Be, and hatef segol is just be. And then the hirik is just like an I, like in bitter, so B or be. The holum is just like an O sound, a long O, it's a bow. And the kamech, hatu, is also, it looks exactly the same as kamech, but it's different, it's kamech, hatu. It will have the O sound to it, and there are clues to tell you what the difference is. You have to know the difference between an open or closed syllable, and you have to know the difference between what's accident and what's not accident, and that will tell you once you recognize those differences. But that's part of a Hebrew class. We're not here to learn all the grammar. Yes, sir.
The letters, they all have the vowels will always have a dot in the center. That's right.
No. You're looking at, so what's in red is the pointing, the vowel.
I know. Vowel,
okay, but this is just the consonant that's there. Is only there for illustration, and they happen to be using the one with the dogged lane, that is a hard sound, and it's typical they use the B. They could have used the bait, they could have used the cough, they could have used any letter. It doesn't make a difference because these vowels will be under all the consonants. And so it happens to be they use the hard sound bait as a way for us to recognize it. And then the kibbutz, it's just a U sound. So it's boo, like in Halloween, boo. Not O-O, but, well, O-O is actually a U sound, isn't it? Boo. So anyway. All right, and then we have, don't forget, we also have vowels that are associated with consonants. Now, once we have the hef, excuse me, not the hef, the hey, and it will be a kamech hey, a segol hey, or sareh hey, or holom hey. It sounds exactly the holom hey. Excuse me, the kamech hey sounds exactly like kamech. There's no difference. It's just it's written with a consonant. And once this, how can I say this right? The hey with the kamech is no longer hey. It's just the kamech, the sound. Okay. So the previous vowels are changeable. We mentioned a word, depending on how long it is pretty standard. It's a pretty structured approach in terms of how they organize the vowels underneath the pointing. It's pretty structured. They almost always try to emphasize that is accent the end of the word. And if the word stretches out either by a prefix to it or a suffix to it, then those vowels are going to change. Because if you want to move the accents further down, what happens is as you put more accent at the end, you're going to decrease the accent at the beginning. So when you decrease the accent, so a kamech may reduce to a hatef kamech, or to a parak, excuse me, or to a hatef parak. It may reduce, in other words, instead of having the long ba sound, it might go to a ba sound. And it's a little nuance there, and you got to really listen for it. But ultimately, it's reducing because it wants the accent at the end of the word. That's why they're changeable. That's why they'll change. There is a very simple, straightforward structure to it, but again, that's part of the Hebrew class. I just want you to recognize that those are changeable, okay? As compared to the letter vowels. The letter vowels, the hey, the yod, and the vav, when they're associated with a vowel, is a letter vowel. It's no longer a consonant. It's no longer a hey. It's no longer a yod. It's no longer a vav. It's the vowel, and the vowel has the exact same sound as it would be, as the pointing vowel that's with it. So, kametz hey is still ba. A sago, well, we'll stay with the ba stuff. The sago hey is still beh. Notice I've not pronounced the hey, the H sound. I don't pronounce the H sound. I'm just pronouncing the vowel sound because it's not an H. It's not a hey. It's a vowel. So it's ba, be, be, bo. Just like we had over here. Ba, be, bo. No difference. It's just going to use it with a consonant. And that way, it's unchangeable. It's not going to reduce. It's just the way that they would use this. Well, I don't know. I won't get too far ahead of myself. So anyway, you have the vowels with a hey, a vowels with a vav, and a vowels with a yod, and they're exact same as we had the changeable vowels. These are just with the consonant letters. And then we have, of course, we talked last time about how the morphology of a word in Hebrew. There is typically you'll find words in Hebrew with triconsonantal, in other words, 3 consonants. You'll also find biconsonantal with 2 consonants. You'll also find quadconsonantal with 4 consonants. But most are tri, in other words, 3 consonants. And that's the root. And once you put the vowels to it, it becomes the stem. And so the first root position, where we have the dalet, and so this would not be davar, technically. A lot of times you might pronounce it that way, but there's no vowels. However, Hebrew was written without vowels, but they were able to vocalize it because they knew what vowels were associated with it. But when we look at it, we're looking here now at the root, and the root doesn't have a vowel. It's just a root position. Root position 1, root position 2, root position 3. I put this so you can see how it's structured. And so you have the dalet in root position 1, you have the bait in root position 2, and you have the resh in root position 3. And to that, we add prefixes or suffixes, or we put the vowels, the pointers. Now, the vowel pointers can be underneath, or they can be, as we've seen before, embedded or infixes, those in between, such as a hirid yod or a kametz hey. So they could be added in between. Yes, sir.
Is this a word right here?
Well, no, because I haven't added anything to it. I'm only showing. So what we have here is you would normally say is this is the dalet beit resh. I don't try to pronounce it normally because you don't have it now. We know it's going to be davar, but it's dalet beit resh. And to dalet beit resh, we could add vowels. If we add vowels, it's going to be davar or some other. It depends. If we add a prefix, we talked about prefixes. One of the things we talked about is did we do preposition last week, or are we doing that tonight? I can't remember. I get it all mixed up. I know we did we're doing definite article tonight. We're doing interrogative for particle tonight, and conjunction vav we did last week, and we're doing prepositions tonight. So you can add to it a conjunction. Conjunction would be the vav. Normally with the shavah underneath it. The shavah is those 2 vertical dots, right? And with the vav underneath, the shavah underneath it, that you get put as a prefix. Now that word would become and, but, also, even. In other words, the conjunctions added to the word. It's and then you can have different prepositions added to it, a definitive article, which we'll look at tonight, added to it, interrogative particle. I mean, how do you know if it's asking a question or not? Well, they add a little particle. It's good. Just you're going to see it's a letter, and so that you can know. Oh, that's a question. They don't have a question mark, so they add something to the prefix at the very first word of the sentence or the verse. Well, they didn't have verses. The very first word they will add this particle, that tells you that, oh, that's a question. So it's not a statement, it's not anything else, it's just a question. And when we get to verbs, there's conjugations, and we'll talk about that. You can have various vowel patterns. The various vowel patterns will tell you if it's going to be a noun or a verb, or really how that word is being used. And also you can have a suffix, might tell you the number, whether it's plural, singular, or plural, or dual, right? Singular, one, plural, multiple, dual, two eyes, 2 feet, 2 hands. Or if you talked about gender, masculine, feminine. They don't have neuter as they did in Greek. It's just masculine or feminine. Remember, gender is a grammatical category. It's not talking about male or female. It's a grammatical category. That is important. Or you can talk about possessiveness. That is whether it's, sometimes the pronouns will be added to it. I should put pronouns in there. Be added to it. So all these can be added to the word to lengthen the word, and that's why those vowels will change. So, for example, the Dalet Beit Resh as a root could appear as dober at the very top one, and that means speaking, dober. So that is, and then, well, I forget now, I'm trying to remember if that's an adjective or a verb. I think it's a verb, but it doesn't look like a verb, so it could be. I just not that up on it. Also, that same root, Dalet Beit Resh, could change the vowel system underneath it, and it could be deber. What deber is he spoke. That is a verb. It also could be daber, which means speak, as in, I'm tired of waiting, speak. It could also be, and what we've already said is davar. Notice the difference here. If you go up the very top one where we had dover, notice that the dogish lane is not in there, the bait. So we pronounce that bait as a V, dover. Go, and then the next one, deber, that dogish lane is in there. That bait has the dot in there, so it's pronounced as the beep. And so it's deber. And then daber, to speak. And then we have davar, which we've already looked at, word, matter, or thing. It actually has several meanings. And then we have, here's the Dalet with the Shabbat underneath it. The 2 dots, vertical dots underneath it. That's the Shabbat. That's not really a vowel. A Shabbat is not a vowel. It's going to have a vowel sound. It's going to take the consonant and add a very, very quick A sound. Daber. Daber. And so it's normally be quick, and I'm not sure how quick it's supposed to be, but yeah. So the point being is by taking the root and changing the vowel system, you come up with a completely different word. So the vowel system is very critical. The pointing system is actually what it is. You can also add to the beginning of it or to the end of it, and it will also change either how it functions in the sentence or the word itself. It will add a conjunction and can make it a question and all that kind of stuff. And so we'll be looking at that. So we talked about nouns last week, gender and number. Regards to gender, Hebrew nouns are either masculine or feminine. There are some that it mentions that are both masculine and feminine. Again, it's not that it's male or female. It's a grammatical category. That's important so that when you, just like in English, verbs and should align with, well, I'm thinking about singular and plural now. A singular verb should align with a singular noun. A plural verb should align with a plural noun. In grammatical categories for nouns, and a adjective should align with its noun it's modifying. So if the adjective is plural or is masculine, then the noun is plural and masculine, then the adjective should be plural and masculine. That's how you know they go together. Although actually in Hebrew it's a lot more with positioning, but not always. The adjective appears after the noun it's modifying. And although it could be modifying a noun that precedes that. So you just, there's some things that you have to look at. So in regard to the number, it can be the singular or plural. And also, as we mentioned, it can be dual, like 2 eyes, 2 feet, 2 hands, this type of thing. So 2 laws, whatever. And so we looked at some nouns and how they're formed. And for example, sus is horse in the singular, and a masculine, basically, that's the basic word, right? Sus. No prefix, no suffix, nothing added to it. To make it plural, I'm going to put a suffix to it. And notice the commonality for the suffix. For most plural masculine words, I'm going to have the heric yod, that's the vowel letter, heric yod, and then the final mem added to it. And I got susim. And that's horses, plural. And so most masculine words, when you add, want to make it plural, you're going to add this heric yod and a final mem. And that's, it's now a plural masculine word. To make it dual, we're going to add a diphthong. That is that where you have that little caret on top, and you have the podic underneath the samek, the last one, and then you have the yod with a heric underneath it. That's not a heric yod. That's a yod with a heric underneath it. It's not a vowel. It's a consonant with a vowel. And then you got the final mem. So this diphthong, just like in English and just like in Greek, the diphthong, the two vowels are pronounced as one. So this is going to be susain. The A and the I sound as susain. So that's two horses, dual. It's easy to recognize the dual because of the diphthong. And the diphthong, not that all duals are diphthongs, don't get me wrong. Not that all diphthongs are duals, don't get me wrong. But you can see that the diphthong is going to stand out. When you look at feminine words such as Torah, that is the word. Torah ends, a feminine word is going to end with a kametz hey. Kametz hey is a vowel. It's not a consonant, it's a vowel. And so it ends with a kametz hey, Torah. And that's its singular form. Now, when to make it plural, it's not going to be the kametz hey anymore. It's going to use the whole vav with the tav at the end, and so it becomes torot. And so the kametz hey changes to an ot. That's the whole vav. That is a vowel, not a consonant. The whole vav. And I can point for you guys. The guys online can't see. That's the whole vav, and then the tav right here. So that is torot. To make it dual, look what we did. It's got the exact same ending for the masculine and feminine with the diphthong. The only difference is the vowel preceding it is now got added a kametz. That's just to help the pronunciation anyway, I can't really explain why I'm not that well versed in it. So this Torah becomes a Torot for plural, and for dual, that is two laws, it becomes Doratain. So hopefully it's starting to make a little bit of sense. And then we looked at several words, just to know, just as a reminder, we looked at the masculine singular word, sus, we've already looked at, and then we looked at melech. Anybody remember what melech means? Anybody at all? Melech? It's king. And we looked at, and so let's go back to sus. And so to make sus plural, it's susim. And melech is now here. You know, the caret on top of melech, on top of the mem. See the little caret on top of the mem? That's going to tell me that pronunciation is at the beginning of the word, or the accent is at the beginning of the word. Someone accent the melech. And so you put the accent at the beginning and not at the end. To make it plural, it's going to change the vowel system because it's extended the word. And so that meh is now with a shavah. The mem is now with a shavah at the beginning. And that is, and now the pronunciation is going to the end of the word. And so it is with the shavah, it's melakim. And then we see davar. Anybody remember what davar means? We just did it. Word. Thank you. Okay. Davar means word, not plural. However, davarim is plural, right? So again, we got the shavah for the plural I'm looking at. The shavah underneath it, that's davarim. And so that's the plural form of it. And then we saw the the word underneath it is the yeled. Yeled is a boy or child. Notice the caret underneath it. And so my accent's on the yeled. And then the plural form, again, we see the change. You see the change is pretty consistent here. First off, I've added to make it plural because it's a masculine word, the heric yod and the final mem. And that changes the vowel structure before it. Because I'm putting my accent at the end, the vowels are going to change at the beginning because they want to start soft and end hard. Start soft and end strong. So it's yeladim. So you go from yeled to yeladim. And then you have the word yom, which is day. So when God created the earth and the first yom, and the second yom, and the third yom, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh yom, he rested. But if you're talking about days, plural, it's yamim. And notice what happened here. Yom, we'll go back to the singular one. Yom with the yod, and its vowel is the holam vav. That is the vav with the holam vav. That's it. And a final mem. Well, that stayed the same in the plural, but instead of having the holam vav, you got the yod with the kamates under it. The mem is still there, but it's not final mem anymore. It's the regular mem. And then I put my plural ending for a masculine word, im. So I get yamim. So yom goes to yamim. It's a very structured approach, and it's pretty consistent. Not that there aren't irregularities or changes, there are. But generally speaking, it's a very structured approach. Feminine words, we won't spend as much time, we'll go through quickly. Malakah, of course, you see the kamates hey at the ending of it. That tells me it's feminine right away. I already know it's a feminine word. Malakah means queen. Look at so you have, if you go back to the singular, masculine singular, melech, and now you look at the feminine for queen, feminine singular, melakah. It's using the same root letters. It's just changing the vowel and putting a suffix on the end so you know it's feminine, and it's changing the vowel system. Now you're not talking about a king, you're talking about a queen. Torah, we've already looked at Torah. Well, and we'll look at the plural from melakah. To make it plural, we're going to change the melakah, the queen. We want multiple queens. And so we're going to add, instead of the kamates hey, we're going to change it to the holam vav with the tav at the end. And that means we change the vowel system in the beginning. And so we get melakot. Melakot. And so Torah, we've already looked at, goes to Torot. And then we have, of course, what does Torah mean, everybody? Law or instruction, right? And then we have the feminine singular word, homa, meaning wall. Chokmah, that's the het sound. Chokmah. To make it plural, I'm changing that kamates hey under the singular to the plural, the holam vav tov. And so chokmah becomes chokmot. And then we get the word for bat is the singular feminine for daughter. Now I don't have the kamates hey ending anymore. It's changed to a tav parek, a parek. And so the feminine words can end either with the hey, kamates hey, or the tav can have a tav, parek tav, or segol tav, or not here tav. I can't remember, something else. So it's not unusual to see that as a feminine ending, okay? So the ba is for daughter, and to make it daughters plural is badnot. Badnot. Now the new is added because there's some changes that occur. You're talking a monosyllabic word that makes some changes as a result, and the new is added. I forget why, but it's not that important. And then the last word, we'll look at the rest of the dual, we'll ignore for now, is keshet. Keshet is notice the caret on top, so that's where my accent is. And my ending is the segol tav, So it's feminine, and it's keshed, and it means bow, as in a crossbow, longbow, or rainbow. It's plural. It's just going to change the whole vav tav ending. Obviously, the vowels change again. They've reduced. So we get keshato. And that's basically how words are structured, or how they kind of work in the noun system. These are actually called absolute nouns. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But what I want to point out is that when masculine nouns, the singular has no additional ending to it, like suit or metal. There's no additional ending. There's no suffix to it. But to make it plural, I'm going to add a suffix to it. I'm going to typically use the Hirik yod with the final men. Hirik yod is a vowel, not a constant. The yod is not a constant, it's a Hirik yod. And then to make it dual, this tool, then I'm going to add the diphthong with the final men. Now the feminine words have a little more complexity, not a whole lot, but basically it's going to end in the singular words are going to end in the kametz hey, the parak tav, the segol tav, or the Hirik yod tav, or the shurik tav. That's typically the endings for words that are feminine in the singular form. And then to make it plural, you just change those to a whole vav tav. Now, once you make that change, other vowels change. So now you won't be doing it per se because you're not writing it, but you might, if you just see these changes and they confuse you, just know they change for a reason, because the word has extended, or there's they used a different ending for it that required a change. And of course, the dual, you can have two forms of dual. One is exactly the same for feminine as singular, and the other just has the kametz prefix to it. So it confused everybody. This is the second or third time we've gone over it. I don't expect you to memorize it. Just start to make sense is all, okay? Just start to make a little sense. I'm not trying to get you to memorize this. You don't need to memorize it. Just say, okay, I've seen that before. Let me look it up. Okay, and then we talked about the conjunction, the vav. And typically it shows up with a shavah underneath it. And it functions to say and, so, or then. So Eved is a bond servant, but Va'eved is and a bond servant, or but a bond servant, or then a bond servant, or also a bond servant. Context will determine how you do that. And obviously, until you get to your own translation, you're going to depend upon others who do the translation. And so here's the word for woman. We've had it before, isha. Now you remember, here's a dagesh forte in the shin, the dot in the middle of it. That says you're doubling it. So if you're transliterated, you're going to write two S's with the little caret on top twice, because you're going to pronounce it twice. It's pronounced, let me leave the vav off, just ish sha. It's double. Ish sha. That's a woman. To make it and a woman, or but a woman, or also a woman, or and then a woman, it'd be ba isha. You just add the shavah, the vav with the shavah underneath it. And then we're going to get tonight to the article, but here's one with the article added, V'ha'isha. And then we have man underneath it. Now man, the word is ish, makes sense. Woman is isha, man is ish, woman is isha. And so ish is man or a man, and put the vav in front of it, so it'll be and man, and a man, then a man, and so forth. It's a va'ish. And then also with the article beneath that is V'ha'ish, and that would be and the man instead of the and a man. So we'll look at the article later tonight. And so the vav with the shavah underneath it is typically how it appears, but it may appear, just so you know, and so you don't say like, well, I never saw this before, it may appear differently. It doesn't really matter how it appears. 90%, probably 95% of the time or more, when that vav is at the beginning of the word, it's functioning as a conjunction. There are some words that begin with vav, but not many. It's functioning as a conjunction, no matter what it looks like. typically it will have the two dots underneath it, a shava. However, it may, depending on the word that precedes it or that comes after it, if it precedes a pay, mem, or a bait, in other words, the P, the M, or the B, that precedes that, it's going to look like the shurik vav. Now, still pronounced as now it's pronounced as a vowel. It's a shurik. So melek becomes umelek. Remember, a shava is not a vowel with the two dots underneath it. It is a sound. So the first one would be bahaish. The second one, umelek, that vav with the dot in the center is a shirk. A shirk is a letter vowel. So you're only pronouncing the vowel. So it's umelek. And that is and a king, or then a king, or also a king, or even a king. And then if it's if there's a vocal shava, we only touched on vocal shava. We didn't examine it because I don't really want to go that far into it. But normally when the shava is at the beginning of a word, it's vocal. Those two dots at the beginning, the first letter of the word, it's vocal. In other words, just like we said, bahaish, that's vocal. Now, if it wasn't the first, if it was the second, it's probably silent. Now, silent in that you pronounce the consonant, not the vowel. Or excuse me, silent, yeah, that's right. And so you have other forms of this that may appear at the beginning of the word, but again, this is functioning the same way as a conjunction vav, and whether it be have the before monosyllables, then you have the vav with the kamates under it. So here we got bason, and or you can have, for example, you have the reduced vowel, the haptic, haptic. This one has I'm pointing here where the aleph is. The haptic potic. What happens is that vav takes the same vowel as the haptic vowel does. So it takes the potic. If it was a haptic kamates, it would take that. If it was a haptic subtitle, it would take this go. And so that's kind of what these show you, the red ones in the center, the vav with kamates, the vav with the sigol, and the vav with the potic. So whatever haptic vowel is in front of it, it'll take that vowel. Listen, you don't need to memorize any of that. You need to know that 90+% of the time, the vav is the beginning of a word. It's a conjunction. It means and, but, even, or also. That's what you need to know. Now, I want to save our reading our most famous verse, not most famous, our famous verse till after we've gone through our review. And let's go through this and then we'll highlight some things. I don't know if we have anyone brave enough to try to read it, but we'll read it together. So the first word, let me look at it here. I did this the other day and I've forgotten what it is. Vanoki, say with me, Vanoki. Look, okay, well, we'll go back over here. The next word has the short vowel in front of it. So this would be ubeti. No, that's not right. I think you're good about. Yeah, ubeti. That's right. Ubeti. The short, right? Okay, and then the next word is na'avod. Next word is eight. Yava. Eight Yava. We're going to look at Yahweh tonight, by the way. So I'm going to assume that nobody knows what this is, but let's look at how we pronounce it. So you have the vav with the shava underneath it. That is pronounced as a vocal. It's the first letter in the word, and so that will have its own syllable, va, and then you have the aleph with the comates underneath it. That was its own syllable. So every consonant with a vowel is a syllable. And so that's, now there's no sound to the aleph, but there is a sound to the comates. And so far you got va-ah. And then you have the noun with the holem on top of it. So that's a vowel with a consonant with a vowel. So that's a syllable. So it's no. So it's va-ah, no. And then you have the kaf with a hirik yod. That's the vowel, hirik yod. So it's va-ah-no-ki. Va-ah-no-ki. And then you get to the next word, and once again we have the vav, except it's now as a shurik. So it's u, and that's its own pronunciation. And then you have another syllable for the hirik sere with the bait, and that's bay. And then you have the last syllable, the t. So it's ubeti. The next word is na, and it's the ayin has, that's the reduced patak, hatef patak. And so the hatef patak is just a reduced sound. And so we get the na, and then the ayin has no sound to it, so it's na. I'm going to pronounce the vowel. It's a reduced hatef patak, it's just short of ah. So na. And then I've got the bait with it's a soft bait. There's no doxlania, there's no dot in the center. So it's a V sound, and but the holem is on top. That's the O sound. So that's the vo sound, or actually it's the ends with the dalet, so it's vod. So every vowel, every consonant with a vowel is a syllable. But if it ends with a consonant, no vowel, it goes together as a syllable. So that's vod. So it's na-vod. And then we had this word we had last week, eight. Eight is this direct object marker. In Greek, we had direct objects for the accusative form. There was a certain structure, case ending, the accusative form. That's how we knew it was functioning in the sentences, the direct object. In Hebrew, you don't have that. In Hebrew, you have eight. And when I see an eight, know that word is going to function as the direct object of the verb. And then we have Yahweh. And normally we don't pronounce it out of respect, but most people don't. They pronounce Adonai. We'll get to that later tonight. But this is Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, with the vowels, the Shabbat, and yeah. So when we look at it, I'm trying to remember what the verse is now. Don't think I even wrote it down. Yeah, I think I know what it is. I know what it is now. Let me just double check it real quick. Unless you guys out there in internet land have it all memorized, and you know what it is, go and tell me. I've got it. I just forgot. I want to make sure it's right before I go. I didn't write it down. I should have wrote it. Yeah. So I'm just trying to make sure I remember which words are which. Okay, so the first word is going to be va'anoki. Va'anoki begins with, it says that But that vav there is not going to be and, it's going to be a, because the rest of the verse would let you know that. But, and this is the word for serve. We will serve, but we will serve. You already know it? I mean, what is it?
But we will serve the Lord. But we will serve the Lord God.
Not quite, you're close. Okay, and so the next word is the shirk, and my house. So that shirk is functioning as a conjunction and bait is from the word house. And so beiti is the my house, the little suffix added to it, the hirkio is the suffix for my house, and we will serve and my house, and then we will serve the Lord. So you have the 8 is the object marker for Yahweh, which is they obviously write, and I'm going to talk about this tonight, Lord in there. So that's from, anybody know the verse? Joshua 24. Yes, sir, 24 and verse 15. That's the last part of it. I don't want to do that whole verse. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So sorry about that. I should have wrote it down, but I wanted to make sure it was right. I got it mixed up with something else, but that's fine. We're good. So now I want to move on to, in the next few minutes, some new things. It won't be that difficult. I want to talk about how they add the definite article. There's really 3 components that are prefix to a word. The hey with a potic underneath it, and a hirkio, or excuse me, the dagesh forte in the consonant that comes after it. So that's why you see the hey with the potic underneath it, but you see the little dot in the center there. Well, that's where the next consonant is going to be. So when it's going to precede the word. And so when it precedes it, you have the hey with the potic underneath it, but that dagesh forte will be in the next word. And that then tells you that is the article the. So it'd be the king or the queen or whatever, okay, the horse or the horses. So, for example, melech, there's our word melech, the mem lambda, not lambda, lamed cough, final cough form. Notice it straightened itself out. Melech, it's pronounced with the caret in the first syllable. And we add the hey with a potic and the dagesh forte. So you see, melech does not have a dot in it, does not have a dagesh forte in it. But when you add the kametz hey, or excuse me, the potic hey with the dagesh forte, notice how it points out. It's ham melech, because what does the dagesh forte do? What does that dot do? It doubles it. So it's ham melech. So you doubled the mem. Ham melech. It didn't change. In this case, it didn't change the accent. A lot of cases it will. Ham melech. And but you've doubled it. So you see at the bottom in the white box, there's all the red is what actually was added to form to make the word the, to make it definitive instead of indefinitive. Now, here's some other examples, and they're all pretty consistent. Here is the indefinite noun, bayit, that is a house. That's the, notice right there you have the diphthong, bayit. Now it's not dual, it's just a diphthong, so it's pronounced bayit, and it means a house. But to make it definitive as the house, I want to add the hey with the potic underneath it, and then I want to put the dagesh forte in it. Well, if we go back to bayit, a house, that dot in the bait is not a dagesh forte, it's a dagesh lane. That's how I know to say bah, bah, instead of bah, bah. It's not bayit, it's bayit. It's not bayit, it's bayit. And so it's that hard B sound to it. Well, what happens is when you put the in front of it to make it the house, not a house, that dot becomes now a doubling and not so it's no longer, it's going to be habayit. It's going to have that double sound to it. It's habayit. Can you see the change it made? You really can't tell a difference in the dot except that we made it red, okay? But the fact that it's there and preceded by the hay with the paddock under it tells me now it's the house. And it also tells me that that's a doubling of the sound. And that's basically how you know. Same thing with a road, Dedrick, a road. To make that the road, I'm going to add the same thing. I'm going to add the hay with the product underneath it, and I'm going to change that dot. Now, if there's no dot, I didn't change anything. If there is a dot, I'm changing it. If there's no dot, I'm adding the dot. If there is a dot, I'm changing it to make it a doubling sound. So that would be Hadirak. And then this last word here is for a warrior. There's gi with the hard gimbal sound. Gi, gibor. And so you got the bait with the hard sound to it. You got the whole vav as a vowel, so that's bor with the resh at the ending. Gibor, a warrior. If I want to make it the warrior, I'm going to put the hay with the paddock underneath it, and I'm going to put that dot. It's the dot's still there. It's not going to be read on your paper, just read on the screen to show you what was changed. Now it's a doubling sound because it's part of the article. It's part of the change to make the article. And so it's Hagibor. Hagibor. You have that G sound twice. Hagibor. It's a doubling sound. That makes sense. You see what's changed. Okay, so also, just so you know, and what I'm going to tell you is that if you see the hay in front of a word, it's probably an article. It's probably an article. Now, some words start with the hay, although most don't. But that hay with the paddock underneath it and the dogish forte in the first consonant next to it can look differently in other cases. In the basic form is shown there, and also as we just did in the previous, these are all begot kafat letters, right? A house, a road, a warrior, that's the bait, the dalet, the gimel, those are all begot kafat letters. They have either the dot, the dogish lane in it, or they don't. They don't, it's a soft sound. If they do, it's a hard sound. When you add the article to it, you add the hay with the product to it, then that dogish lane actually becomes a dogish forte, and now no longer a hard sound, it's a doubling sound. All right, so the basic form is the top line in the center is the hay with the product underneath it and the dogish forte. It's the same thing for the begot kafat letters, except now that if there was a hard or dogish lane in that begot kafat consonant, then it's changed to doubling. That's what I was trying to get across. Okay, gutturals such as the aleph, the ayin, and the resh. Well, gutturals cannot take a dogish lane. They cannot take a dogish forte. A guttural can't take a dot. There's no dot in a guttural, ever, 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 none. So what happens? The paddock compensates. It's called it lengthens, and so that hay with the paddock when the dogish forte changes just to a hay with the kametz to it. It lengthens. That's to compensate the fact that it can't use the dogish forte. So, and then we have other gutturals that if it has the ha, this the hay with the kametz, the tet with the kametz, and the ayin with the kametz. If it has a kametz to it, then that hay is going to change. Again, gutturals cannot take a dot, no dot in a guttural, and then that kametz, that hay is going to take a segol instead. And then if you have a yod, shava yod, or a mim with shava, then again, it won't take the shava won't take a guttural or a dot. So it will be if there's two dots under the first letter, it won't take a dot, a dogish lane or forte. And so you'll have the hay with the paddock. It doesn't link. I don't know why. Okay, thoroughly confused everybody. What you want to know is that if there's an hey in front of it, it's probably the article. So if you have a vav and then a hey and then the word melech, vahamelech, guess what? It's and the king. You had a conjunction and the article and the word. Vahamelech is and the king. And then there's called the interrogative particle. Well, it looks like the hey, except instead of having the potic under it, or instead of having some goal, or instead of having any of those other vowels under it, it has the hatep potic. That is the reduced potic. And when you see that with the little two dots and the potic next to it, that's a hatep potic, a reduced vowel. And that is now telling you that, and it's going to always be at the first word of the sentence. If it has that, it's a question. That's the question mark. And that's how you know they're asking a question. If you notice here, the spelling of the interrogative particle may change before gutturals and before gutturals with comates in it. So it can look differently. And there, what one of the cues and clues is that to help you is if it's the very first word, it's quite possibly the interrogative particle, in other words, it's a question. Also, if it's attached to a verb, verbs don't have articles to it. But if it has this hey with any one of these vowel letters underneath it, it's an interrogative particle. It's a question. Okay, then we're going to end with prepositions. There's lots of prepositions to deal with, but we're only going to look at what's called the inseparable prepositions. In other words, it's a prefix added to the word. So we can add the conjunction like vav, we can add an article like the ha, and now we can add a preposition. There are three major prepositions that you need to be familiar with. They occur most often. The lamed with a shabah is a preposition that means to, toward, or for. When it's added to the word, prefix to the word, and you find it over 20,000 times in the Old Testament. And so it would be like to the king. Lahamelech. Lahamelech would be to the king. Or you have the bait with the shabah. And if it's prefixed to the word, it could have like, which means in, at, with, by, or against. It's used over 15,000 times. So when it's prefixed to it, it could be like Bahamelech is at or with the king or against the king. And then if you had the kaf also with the Shiva underneath, which means as, like, or according to. It's used over 3,000 times. So it could be Kahamelech is as the king or as the king Kahamelech. And so you'll see these prefix to words and is functioning as the preposition. We'll show you a little more about this tonight as we go through it. Now there are other, for example, other prepositions that are separable. In other words, they're standalone words. These are not standalone. They will not stand by themselves. They're always attached prefix to a word. Everything we've looked at so far has been prefixed, right? We prefixed the conjunction vav to go and, but, also, or even. We prefixed the definite article for the, and now we're prefixing these three prepositions. They're most commonly used. The la, the ba, and the ka. And we see them here as, here we have basadeh in a field, or kamelech, like a king, and they're prefixed directly to the noun it's modifying. There are some changes when the article is added. I don't want to get too much into it, but basically that ha, the hey disappears. But what happens is the Dagish forte that was there, and so you see the very first word for the field, hashadeh, that dog, that red dot in the, hasadeh, that's a sin, not a shin. Hasadeh, that red dot is a doubling, it's a Dagish forte. What happens is it remains with the bashadeh. Well, that tells me there was an article there. It was a the, and it's still there. It's just been absorbed into the preposition. So the field has become in the field with basade. It's a little tricky, but ultimately the article remains, the definite article remains, except now it's been absorbed in the preposition. And the only way you know is the fact that that dogged forte remains. Now here, it's not on the last word. I'm pointing you guys in line to the last word in the fire, ba'esh. Well, the only way I know is that the lengthening of that commate's there. It's been lengthened. Those take time to just get comfortable with, and you don't really need to know it. But the fact that I have a preposition, in this case, it's the ba, the ka, and the va again. It could have been the lamed, the le, and the fact that the dogged forte is still there, or there's a lengthening because it's lengthened. In the fire has lengthened. The commate's is lengthened because it's in front of the olive there. It's in front of a guttural, so gutturals can't take a dot. They don't like dots. They reject them. So ultimately, that to compensate, the compensatory lengthening, can't say the word, it lengthens to commates. You're not writing grammar, so you don't need to know it as much, but you want to be familiar with it. You won't see too much in the commentaries, but I just want you familiar with it. Actually, I'm trying to entice you to take Hebrew someday. So we looked at some words, and these words we've already done before. All of these we've done. We've done sus for horse. We've done melech for king. We've done davar for word, matter, or thing. We've done eled for child or boy. We've done yom for day. We've done malkah for queen, and we've done Torah for law instruction. We've done chokmah for wall, and abat for daughter, and keshet for bow. These are absolute nouns. They're called absolute because they can function as either the direct object or the subject, the nominative, right? So it can function as a subject or the direct object. How do I know when it's functioning as a direct object? I add the marker 8 to it in front of it. How do I know it's when it's functioning as a subject? Because there's nothing added to it. Now, I'll show you this because now we want to look at how do I know it's functioning as a possessive in the genitive case. And the only way to know it is to move to what they call the construct noun. Basically, there's a couple things that occur. The very first word is eved. Eved means slave or bond servant. And then the next word is hamelech. Well, we just learned the article, so it's the king. And the king, which we just saw hamelech, king here, and you see king is a absolute noun. It is the subject. And it is definite. It is hamelech. It is the king. It's not a king. It's the king. But anytime I have two nouns side by side, listen to this. Anytime I have two nouns side by side, or three nouns side by side, not adjectives, not pronouns, but two nouns, or three nouns, or four nouns side by side without interruption, that's then functioning in a possessive manner. It's always possessive. It's called a construct chain. It could be just two, or it could be multiple. And what happens is the very last word is going to be the object of that preposition, or object of the possessiveness. It's taking the possession. It's the servant of the king. And so notice also that you have the article on the king, melech. It's not showing for the servant, that is the bond servant or eved, but it's there. It only shows up on the last word, the absolute noun. It doesn't show up on the others. So this is eved hamelech, the servant of the king. What it says is the first two nouns in the construct change is called the construct noun. And it's said to be the construct state. And that means it's going to function in a possessive. It's of the king, servant of the servant of the king. The second of the two nouns is called the absolute noun. It's said to be in the absolute state. The absolute form is a singular noun. It's also its lexical form. In other words, that's how you'll find it in the lexicon or dictionary. And so The first one, noun, is the construct. The second is the absolute. So if you have two nouns side by side, okay, I'm not talking about a verb, I'm not talking about a pronoun, I'm talking about two nouns side by side. Then they're going to function in the construct. One of them is going to be of, generally. So here we have Ebed is the construct, so it is the servant of the king's servant, possessive. Go a little further, and so you can have Kol Ha'ish. Ish is man, Kol is voice. I put the definite article in front of it, so I have the Ha'ish. And so there are two nouns side by side. And because they're two nouns side by side, it is Kol Ha'ish is the voice of the man. The voice is the construct of the man, so it's the man's voice. And notice again that the article, ha, the definite article, only appears on the last word. It does not appear on the first. But yet, we translate it with the voice of the man, because I guess symbolically it's there. It's physically, it's there, just in case it's not physically there. The absolute noun takes the article for all its construct chain. So the next one is melech. It's in the construct state, or the first one. The second one is haaretz. So that would be the land. The land. It's eretz is land. Put make it definite. The land would be haaretz. Haaretz. And to be the king of the land, put two nouns side by side. Ebed is a servant, and we already did this in Ha-melech, servant of the king. Davar, Navi is prophet. And to make it definite for the prophet, you put the article ha. Notice that dot in the center there for in the noon is a doubling. It's Hanavim, and so Davar Hanavim would be the word of the prophet. Sefer is the book, and then we have Torah. We make it definite. We have HaTorah, so HaTorah, and Sefer HaTorah is the book of the law. Here's the thing to point out: two nouns side by side. One of them is going to be possessive, okay? It's going to be the first one is possessing, so we have the book of the law. You have the word of the prophet, the servant of the king of the land, the voice of the man. So it could be a man's voice, the land's king, the king's servant, the prophet's word, the book of the law showing possession. That's how they do genitive case. It's called a construct chain. And all it is two nouns side by side. The last noun may or may not have if they don't have the article, I'm going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so here's an example. Notice this has more than two nouns. It has three. It has the first word in the Hebrew is davar. The second word is melech. And the third word is haaretz. So we already saw haaretz. Haaretz is land. Ha is the article, so haaretz is the land. Melech is king. And davar is word, and this is the form, construct form, absolute form. So davar is construct, melech is construct, but haaretz is absolute. It has the article to it, and so it is I thought I wrote it down here. It should be the word of the king of the land. I thought I had it in here. I guess I don't. The word of the king of the land. I know I wrote it, so I don't know what happened to it. Just not. Okay, and just to see in the Greek comparison, because you guys are all Greek grammarians, hologos to basileos, gaze. All of the hologos is in the nominative case. It's a subject. You got the article ho, you got the omicron sigma ending, that's the nominative case, and then you have the genitive case for the article to, the genitive case for basileos, that's the king, or the king, and then you have taste, gase, both the article and the noun gase is in the genitive case, the land. So the word of the king of the land. Same thing as how they do it in Greek with genitive, but in Hebrew, they put it in the construct form. And oftentimes, notice it has the dashes in between, or you got davar with a dash, melech with a dash, haaretz. Davar, melech, haaretz, it's read almost as one word. As a matter of fact, it is read as one word, and so even the pronunciation changes as a result, oftentimes. And so its form is construct, construct absolute. Davar, that's called a makif, the dash. Melech, makif, haaretz, the word of the king of the land. Okay, confused everybody? That's okay. We'll play with it as we go, and we'll get there. We see how they do a subject. They leave it in the absolute state. They see how they do it as a direct object. That is, they put the et in front of it, the object marker, and then now that's how they do it as possessive. And that's it. That's all there is about nouns. There's a little more, but that's about it. That's the basic. And so you can have a definitive construct state, the book of the prophet. Sefer Hanavi. Sefer Hanavi. The book of the prophet. The absolute noun has the article, ha. The first does not show it, but it's there. Because the construct chain is controlled by the last word, the absolute form. And so if it has the article, everything in the construct chain has the article, even if you don't see it. All of it does. So it is the book of the prophet. Now you can have an indefinite, a book of a prophet, and there's no definitive article. There's no hey or ha with it. So it's Sefer Navi. And so it's a book of a prophet. And so I just want to, it's still two nouns side by side. It's still the construct state. The Navi is the absolute, and Sefer is in the construct form. And so it is a book of a prophet. It's the prophet's book. Don't touch the prophet's book. He'll prophesize about you, and it probably won't be good. All right, that was a lot, and so I'm a little bit behind, not by about 5 minutes or so. Let's take a 5-minute break. Come back about 7:30. Let's come back 7:35. So it's a 7-minute break. Thank you. Any questions before we break? You guys online, you got it all this down pat. Everybody's good.
All good.
Good, all good. All right. It's all Greek to me, you know.
Thanks.
Oh, Hebrew to me.
Oh, Hebrew to me. Yeah, Wayne, you're right. All right, so we're moving to exegetical principles. A reminder, we're in session 9. 5 more sessions to go. Hopefully you feel like you're making some progress. This session, now we want to begin to look again. We started last week. We looked at I remember his name, Jason D. Roach, and his How to Understand and Apply the Old Testament. Last week we looked at the text. What is the makeup of the passage, and under that we looked at the genre, which determine the literary form, the subject matter, the function of the passage. You compare it to similar genres, and you consider the implications for its interpretation based on what type of genre it is. Also, you look at literary units and textual hierarchy. In other words, like where's the passage start? Remember we looked at where does it start, where does it end? Find the basic structure of it, and text criticism. Is there something that's going to needs to be highlighted with regard to its original wording? Tonight, we want to begin to look at observation. How is this passage communicated? And so we're going to break it down, and he breaks it down into 3 areas: clause and text grammar, and argument tracing, and word and concept studies. Well, you might be thinking, well, we've been doing word and concept studies. Well, yes, we have. But our perspective of word study is much broader, and that's what we've been trying to get across in this class. Rather than just looking at the word or the phrase, and which is what his word and concept study is going to It's a portion of the bigger picture, in other words. And so we want to look at the bigger picture. And we'll start with clause, text grammar, then argument tracing, and word and concept studies. And so, for example, clause and text grammar. Well, in other words, this is where you will have some understanding of the grammar, okay? To see how the sentence, the phrase, or the paragraph is structured. And in this case, the CL means clause. It equals a connector. May or may not have a connector. That's what the plus or minus means. Plus its nucleus, that is the nucleus clause. And plus any modifier may or may not have a modifier. For example, the connector would be and, its nucleus, David killed Goliath. And the modifier, with a stone. Well, how did David kill Goliath? Well, that's what the modifier tells us, with a stone. Well, the connector tells us and, so there's something that preceded. So David killed Goliath and something else preceded. In this case, we don't know. To have a clause, really all you need is the nucleus. David killed Goliath. That is a clause. You may have a modifier or connector associated with that. And for example, and this may be hard to see, but if you, I don't know if you see it on the paper or not. I couldn't get it blown up any further. This is from Exodus 19, verse 4. We won't try to read the Hebrew. It doesn't really, we're not emphasizing the Hebrew right now. We're emphasizing the structure of this. And so what you have is this, look at how the clause and how it relates to itself and to other clauses. What's the hierarchy of the text? And so you start with this text in verse 4. You have seen what I did to Egypt and how I lifted you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And so we start with the hierarchy where the main clause is in you have seen. So that's the clause, you have seen. Well, what have you seen? Well, that's what the followed by the relative clause in 4b, beginning with the word, the Hebrew word is ashir, meaning what or which or who. But this is what I did to Egypt. You have seen, and so the relative clause is and what I did to Egypt, followed by the object clause, which the structure, the way it's laid out, you see the main clause you have seen is to the right and everything else is indented. What I did to Egypt, those are all sub to it. They're modifiers to it in some form. And so you have what I did to Egypt, so you have seen is the main clause. What I did to Egypt is a modifier, it's a relative clause. And then for C, and how I lifted you on eagle's wings. Notice the and. And if you actually can read the Hebrew, you see the vav in front of the first word there. That's the and. And so we see these verbal clauses in C and D, and how I lifted you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Here's what's significant. What I did to Egypt is controlling, or the and how I lifted you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. The point is God's people had seen what God did and how he lifted them and how he brought them to himself. And so when you start looking at the clauses and breaking them down, it gives you, you could do a sermon from here. You have seen. Well, that's not a complete sentence, it's a clause. Well, what have you seen? Well, what I did to Egypt. What did you do to Egypt? Well, it's how I lifted you on eagle's wing and brought you to myself. Well, we know the passage is talking about how God had miraculously through Moses carried the Egyptians through the Red Sea, parted the Red Sea, and brought them to the other side, and then closed it off to destroy the Egyptians that were chasing them. And so by breaking, and actually the book does this to verse 4, 5, and 6. I just didn't want to go too far with it because I want you to see where it's really going. The point is that once you start looking at it and breaking it into pieces and putting in some sort of hierarchical structure, you can build an outline in a sermon from there. You can build a greater understanding of what's being presented. Does that make sense? Any questions? There wasn't a whole lot to that, so I didn't want to go any further. Any thoughts? Okay, and so argument tracing. Well, an argument isn't like you and I arguing. An argument is basically the way in which the author structures his thoughts and to communicate the reality that he intends the audience to view. So it's how the author communicates his thoughts so to get his point across or to persuade his audience. An argument seeks to compel beliefs or actions. A lot of scripture is, most of it is rhetorical in that its purpose is to persuade. What's the purpose of scripture? It's to persuade someone to do what? To have certain beliefs, to do certain actions. And so arguments seek to compel those beliefs or actions, and they come in all kinds of genres. You find them in narratives, you find them in the narrative plots, hortatory sermons, that is, basically someone preaching, poetic prayers, and many other different genres. The purpose is to persuade someone, and they use various methods to do it. So when you're talking about argument tracing, you're talking about two steps. First is to diagram the tracing. Visually capture the relationship of the propositions, the distinct thoughts in the passage. And second is to articulate the passage structure by means of this an exegetically grounded message-driven outline. In other words, produce an outline with sound. So once we sort of establish the text genre, its literary units, its hierarchy, once we determine the original words, the meanings that are used, and we translate and look at the grammar that's being used, we can look more closely at the features of the structure of the arrangements of those parts in the text. Perhaps more than any other step, this exegetical process is the one that helps us more than anything else to grasp that message. The level of structure here is two parts: to analyze the literary features and create some kind of flow. It's kind of a little bit what we did here. Basically, you have a hierarchical structure with the clause and subclauses. And so effectively, we want to do the same thing. And then as a result, you draft an outline, an exegetical that you can pull from the text, and you draft an outline of what it's trying to say. It's important for us to realize and remember, I want us to think about, that the biblical authors wrote their words for the ear, as well as for the eye, but mostly for the ear. Most people didn't read. Ezra stood to read the law in Nehemiah 7, or I don't know, I think might have said, Nehemiah 8, thank you very much. Well, one chapter, come on. Nehemiah 8. And he read it. As most people couldn't read. So it's really written for the ear. And so there are cues that are often set out in those patterns. Moses set this pattern up when he commissioned the priest, and he says in Deuteronomy 31, verses 9 through 11, won't for the whole thing, but read this law before all Israel in their hearing every 7 years. So it's about them to hear and heed, to take in, understand, and to obey. And so as we look at how to sort of build this outline, I want to look at Jonah. So let's turn to the book of Jonah. Because of time, we're not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to pull up some parts to it. Jonah. Where are you, Jonah? There we go. Mine's on page 1448. Starting on 1448. So as we look at Jonah, we won't take the time to read all 3 chapters. 3 chapters? Yeah, 4 chapters, excuse me. All 4 chapters. But if you do, you really find 2 major events that are parallel that occur. First is Jonah's experience with God's steadfast love And you'll find that all the way through chapter 2 and verse 10. You also find, and secondly, in major experiences, an experience again of God's steadfast love, except this time it's from chapter 3 and verse through chapter 4. What's the difference? Well, the difference is the first time is when Jonah was called from, where was Jonah at?
Nineveh.
No, to rise to go to Nineveh. Does it ever say where he's actually at? He's in Jerusalem. He's in, I don't know. I hadn't studied it. Huh? No, he's going to Tarshish. He's fleeing to Tarshish. Tarshish. He's fleeing. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish. I don't think it ever said where he's actually at or from. I'll have to study that. I'm curious. Anybody knows, let me know. It doesn't. I don't know if it makes a big difference, but So anyway, what we find is the very first time he experiences God's steadfast love is when he is fleeing God. The second time is when he's actually in Nineveh and told to once again. So notice we start in verse 2 and 3 of chapter 1. Here, God speaking to him says, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for the wickedness has come before me." But, verse 3, Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it, and with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. I want you to notice that you have this sort of pattern that exists throughout all of Jonah. And I'm going to point to these guys on here in present. The blue, first the blue is God's initial call for a message of steadfast love. That's what we just read. He called a message for Jonah to deliver of God's steadfast love to Nineveh. And then if you look at the second experience, let's turn to chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And this is, of course, where he has already been spit out by the whale, the great fish. Let me get it correct. It's not an apple on the tree. It's not a whale in the sea. It's a great fish and the fruit of the tree. And so in chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, here we're finding once again this little structure. Arise, go to Nineveh, to the great city, and proclaim to it the proclamation which I'm going to tell you. And so once again is this God's call for Jonah to go deliver a message of his love. What's his love? It's going to be repentance, right? Nineveh, repent. So notice the structure. In Jonah's first experience of his love, it's when Jonah's fleeing God. And his second experience of his love is when Jonah is in obedience to God, that is to deliver the message. And so the blue A, God's initial call for a message of steadfast love, is in parallel with A prime. That little comma is a prime. A prime is like it's parallel. So A parallel, God's second call for a message of steadfast love in chapter 3 and verses 1 and 2. There's a direct relationship. God has called Jonah to deliver a message of steadfast love in both circumstances, when he's fleeing and when he's been upon the land and caught up after the great fish. And so then in the green, I color-coded these for a reason. In the green, Jonah's personal need for steadfast love is in verses 3 through 16. Now, we won't read it for time's sake, but in verses 3 of chapter 1 through 16 is, of course, when Jonah is on the ship. What happens to Jonah on the ship? They threw him overboard because they didn't like him, did they? Why did they throw him overboard? He was the cause of the sea being a turmoil. And so the great storm that was coming upon him. And they casted lots that fell upon Jonah. Jonah explained. And so he said, throw me overboard. And they didn't want to do it, so they tried to empty out the ship, and it just wasn't working. But they finally threw him overboard. And of course, what happened is that. So we have a message of Jonah's personal need for steadfast love in chapter 1, verses 3 through 3 through 16. I had a point I was going to make here. I'm trying to remember what it was. I remember it now. And so the parallel to that, B prime, endurance is a second experience, is Nineveh's corporate need for steadfast love. That is, Jonah expressing the need to Nineveh. And so we see in chapter 3, verse 3 through 9, is when he comes to Nineveh and he proclaims the message. And of course, the people repent. So in verse 6, the word reached chapter 3, verse 6, when the word reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne and laid aside his robe and from him covered himself with sackcloth and sat in ashes. He issued a proclamation, verse 7, and Nineveh, by decree of the king and his nobles, do not let man, beast, herd, flock taste the thing. Do not let them eat or drink water, verse 8, but both man and beast must be covered with sackcloth. And let all men call upon God earnestly, that each may turn from his wicked way to the violence which is in his hand. So Nineveh is being shown a picture of, or the need, a corporate need as a community of God's steadfast love. And so in the first experience, C, that is in the sort of the red, is God's demonstration of his steadfast love in verse 17. What happens in verse 17? The great fish comes and takes Jonah and saves him from the depths of the sea. And so in the second parallel, C prime, God's demonstration of steadfast love once again comes, except in chapter 3 and verse 10? Verse 10. Verse 10, when God saw their deeds, that they turned from their wicked ways, and God relented concerning the calamity which he had declared he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. And then we see in D, Jonah's first experience of God's steadfast love, Jonah's positive response to Yahweh's steadfast love in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Won't read that whole thing for time, but there Jonah, while he's in the fish, he did what? He just, if you watch Pinocchio, when he is in the fish, who's the fish? Gestapo?
Geppetto.
Come on, huh?
The dad?
I didn't hear it.
You talked to the dad?
Geppetto.
Geppetto, thank you. It was Pinocchio in the fish, though, right? Or was Geppetto wasn't in the fish, Pinocchio was. It might have been Geppetto. I can't remember the cricket with the hat and the fish. So it must have been Geppetto. But, he was cooking food in there, half dogs and stuff like that. Well, this is not the case. What is Jonah doing? He's praying to God. Verse 2, in chapter 2, I called out of my distress to the Lord. You're going to do a sermon, you need to have your act together, not like me. I called out to my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help in the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice, and so forth. And so he responds to God's steadfast love in a positive way. But the counter, or the parallel, D prime, in the second is where Jonah's negative response. What happened to the negative response? What happened? Why is he negative response? Because God relented the calamity upon Nineveh. And so Jonah was not happy, right? And so he had this negative response in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. And then, of course, you have so that's the parallel. This is the point. Listen, see the point, okay? Two major emphases of God's steadfast love in two very structured approaches. A prime, A prime, B prime, C prime, D, and D prime. And then you have the conclusion, Yahweh's lesson of steadfast love, chapter 4, verses 4 through 11. The Lord said, do you have good reason to be angry? Then Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself, and he sat under the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. So the Lord appointed a plant, and it grew up over Jonah to be shade over his head, to deliver him. We know the story, or the event, I don't want to say story, from his discomfort, and Jonah was extremely happy about the plant. But God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day and attacked the plant, and it withered. When the sun came up and appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head, he became faint and begged with all his soul to die, saying, death is better to me than life. And then God said to Jonah, do you have good reason to be angry about the plant? And he said, I have good reason to be angry, even to death. And the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant for which you did not work and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and their left hand, as well as many animals? The conclusion is God's lesson of steadfast love. That's Helen Hunt calling. God's lesson of steadfast love. I said the entire story is framed by the prophet's flight from God and his reason for the flight. In Jonah chapter 1 and verse 3, his flight. In chapter 4 and verse 2, his reason. 4 verse 2 says he prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, please, Lord, was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish. And I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for death is better to me than life. Jonah's reason for his flight is in 4 verse 2. The prophet Jonah did not agree or like the character of God's loving nature. And the irony of this is matched by the number of various other literary features in the book. For example, the pagan sailors did what? They honored God by sacrifice in chapter 1 and verse 16. After 1 and verse 16 says, this is after they picked up Jonah in verse 15, threw him in the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Verse 16, then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So we see here where the Jonah, who rejected God's loving nature, was accepted by the pagan sailors, where his own prophet, God's prophet, was defiant against God. Jonah also declares at the end in the song of deliverance, salvation belongs to the Lord in chapter 2 and verse 9, when he is praying for deliverance from God. And the truth is, then evidence both in Nineveh's repentance and in God's withholding punishment in chapter 3 and verse 16, verse 6 through 10. However, God rescues the prophet from death. In the end, Jonah wishes to die rather than live because God allowed the Ninevites to live instead of die. How ironic all this is. Even as God's prophet Jonah cannot accept God's steadfast love unless he is the recipient. In chapter 2, verses 8 through 9, he's praying for God's steadfast love, but he doesn't want it for anyone else. The story of Jonah's witnesses is both a linear and parallel pattern. That's what we laid out here, A versus A prime, B versus B prime. But the conclusion comes in E. The conclusion is the unexpected nature of that God calls us to the main point of the story, God's lesson on steadfast love. God is love, and hence he loves all humanity and all mankind. And he wishes and desires, 2 Peter 3 verse 9, God is long-suffering, desiring that none should perish, but all should come to him in repentance. And so the lesson here is that when you break this out and just trace it out and you look at the structure of it, you can get to the actual point. The story is not about Jonah. Jonah is the foil in the story. He's being used to show God's love for all humanity. And the irony is Jonah rejected God's love unless it's for him. Don't we have Christians like that? Oh. Anyway, it's a great lesson there. You can take this and build this from here to an outline of Jonah, where the author pushes the reader to stand in awe of God and not to be like Jonah. You get the point? To be like God, loving all humanity, for we're all made in the image of God. And not to be like Jonah, just love me, don't worry about everybody else. God calls Jonah to Nineveh. He sends the storm when Jonah disobeys. He intensifies the storm to force the sailors to toss Jonah overboard. God is the object of the sailors' praise. God provides the great fish to rescue Jonah. God is the object of Jonah's praise in the fish's belly. God is the one that moves the fish to vomit up Jonah on the beach. God resends Jonah to the call of Nineveh to repent. God responds to the Ninevites' repentance by relenting from punishing them. God's steadfast love toward those who call on him makes Jonah angry, and God provides the plant, the worm, the scorching east wind to instruct Jonah in God's ways. God calls his prophet to value human life and celebrate his bestowal and steadfast love. God is the character, the main character, not character. God is the main character of this drama, of this event. Jonah is nothing but a foil, exalting God and his steadfast love. And that's how, when the fascinating thing about is when it's written for the ear and it's read in such a way, a lot comes out. We don't see it oftentimes because, one, we're not used to seeing these clues. This is why you want to break it out and look at the hierarchy, the structure, and find and then outline it from there. And you can find your lesson for Jonah. But I've heard a lot of lessons from Jonah, and most times it's about Jonah fleeing and then about repentance. But that's not what it's about. It's about God's love for all humanity. Most lessons I've heard from the pulpit has been about repentance, and I hear a lot about the plan and all this kind of stuff, and and Jonah fleeing and this kind of stuff. But not many really recognize the overall arching picture that Jonah presents. It's about God's steadfast love for all humanity and all mankind. And something that I think the Lord's church needs to remember often. We're nearing the end here, so this is how he lays out pretty good. I like most of what he does for word studies. We've looked at a lot of this before, so we won't spend a lot of time. In other words, he says that there are these 6 main approaches to choose a word. How do you choose what word? You're reading a passage, and you're going to do a word study. Maybe it's a school assignment. Maybe you're getting ready to preach something. How do you know what word to choose? Most of us intuitively know, but he lays it out. Study words or phrases that are theologically significant or crucial to understanding the passage. Study words or phrases that are puzzling or unclear. That doesn't make sense to me. Study words or phrases that have a figurative meaning instead of a literal meaning. It's very important to recognize figurative versus literal. Study words or phrases that are apparent synonyms or antonyms. Synonym being it's agreeing or replacing. Antonym is the opposite. That's what the A is for. Study words or phrases that are repeated and are clearly central to the theme of the message. Oftentimes the author will repeat the same word over and over and over, or the same phrase over and over and over. When he's repeating it, you better latch onto it. Study words or phrases that are infrequent. Sometimes there's something that just stands out because he's never used that before. Where's this come from? Why did he say that? And so you might want to pull from there. For example, words that often have a range of meaning. If I say trunk, what is the word trunk? What comes to your mind when I say trunk? Not trunk or treat now, but trunk. Okay, the storage compartment of the car, right? In the back of the car, right? Oftentimes, although the VW bug is in front of the car. But it could be the main part of the tree, the stem, the base of the tree. It could be the torso of a person's body, his trunk, or the animal's body. It could be the nose of an elephant, the trunk of an elephant. It could be a large box with a hinged lid that stores clothing or something. Huh? That's what I thought. That's what you thought. Okay. So all these things can bring to certain mind various meanings of it, but and because meanings can have overlap, in any given context, the author could choose different words to communicate that same reality. So you want to be aware of what the range of meaning is. I'm getting to a point here, so just hang on, and look for overlaps for words that the author could have chose. Synonyms. Why did he use this word? I mean, a fine example is in John chapter 22. Do you love me, Peter? Well, love is the word we have in English, but obviously they have multiple words in Greek, agape and phileo. Why did he use those words? Are they synonyms? A good study will tell you the answer to that. There are examples, for example, the meaning of the noun segula, which is treasured possession in Exodus 19, verse 5. I don't want to read all these examples because it's you can't see them. So, but you get the point. But here's where I want to take us with this. And so when you look at range of meaning of words, you want always, your target text is what the word, the meaning it's looking for. In other words, somebody's doing a study of Salo and they're looking at Ephesians 5:19. Well, you certainly want to look at how it's used elsewhere. If somebody's looking at doulos and they're looking at, I forget the passage now or whatever you're looking at, certainly there's a target passage you're focused in on. You want to know its meaning. But you want to look beyond that target passage. You want to look into the same author, the same book, say in Ephesians. So I want to see, does he use it elsewhere in Ephesians? Well, if not, does that same author use it somewhere else? Or does the same period or genre or division used throughout? Or what about the rest of the Old Testament? Or the rest of the Hebrew literature or ancient versions or other cognate languages? Cognate language would be like, we have Hebrew, a cognate language would be like Ugaritic or Akkadian. And those are other Semitic languages that are very similar to Hebrew, or Hebrew is very similar to them, depending on how you look at it. So sometimes, if, for example, if a word is Aramaic, for example, is very Semitic language, it's a cognate language with Hebrew. They share a lot of the same, well, I'm not saying words, but sometimes those words have different usages and variations to them with different spellings and such. And sometimes they'll take a language from Aramaic and apply it. Matter of fact, that's why we have Aramaic and Hebrew. In a lot of places in the Old Testament, they use Aramaic. Well, a lot of it, they were speaking Aramaic then too. So anyway, cognate languages, if a word is only used one time in all of Scripture, and the only way you can really know its understanding is how it's used in other related languages, Semitic language, cognate language. You gotta be very careful with that because it's not the same language. Anyway, here's a picture of what you want to look at. It's not just the target text. It's that same book, the same author, the same, what about, same period now is important. For example, if it's anachronistic, you'll look at something that was done in classical Greek when you're looking at something that's written in the New Testament period. To say, well, in classical Greek, here's how it applies. Well, okay, that's true in classical Greek, but does that mean how it applies in the New Testament? Maybe, maybe not. So that would be anachronistic. It's not appropriate time. That would be the same period or same genre, same division. No, division, Old Testament versus New Testament. Genre, is it narrative prose? Is it poetic? Is it apocalyptic? Is it whatever the genre might be? And so that's kind of what he highlights for word studies and concepts. And I think a lot of this we've done, but some of this I just want to sort of bring to highlight. So looking at exegetical fallacies, I want to look at something different tonight, Hebrew tools. And so this is what Logos has, but you may have a software tool or even a physical one for English Hebrew reverse interlinear. Reverse interlinear says it's going to have both the Hebrew and the English, but reverse means it's going to have the English first and then get the Hebrew. If it's a Hebrew in an English interlinear, then the Hebrew will be first. And so in Logos, you have the very first line, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, let's look at the first line. The little, in the beginning, God created, no problem. Then you got the dot. Well, the dot means the Hebrew word is not translatable. Well, look what's underneath it. What word is that? It's 8. 8 is not a translatable word. It's a marker, grammatical marker, to tell me the direct object of the verb. And so we see it twice. It's associated with the heavens, and we see it again with the earth. And so Hebrew lets me know that the heavens and the earth are functioning as the direct object of the verb created. So the second line, it starts with, it has, now I put on the bottom, we did this our very first, okay, I got time. Our very first, I think, Hebrew word passage, a famous passage. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Bareshit bara, that's the verb, created. Elohim, 8, hashamayim, va'it haaretz. And so, I read that only because I want you to see I put the color codes, because what the interlinear does is it breaks each word down to its parts. So baresh now shows the very first word is with the preposition bait. See the shabbat underneath it? In. All right, see how that works? And then you got the actual word for the beginning, reshi. Now, doesn't exist. And so it's inserted in English. That's what that little E stands for. It's inserted in the English because it's not in the Greek, or in the Hebrew, excuse me. So bareshi is in beginning. We put the before to make logical sense in our understanding. So then you got God, Elohim. You got created, bara. You got the object marker. You got here we got now the article ha, and the heavens, shamayim. And notice the shin with the dagesh forte in it. It's a doubling. And so the ha, the article, which is the prefix to it normally. You look down at the bottom. You got where I got the ha in the blue, hashamayim. But here they show you how they break it apart. Hashamayim, ha is a separate from shamayim. Sham has the dagesh forte, so it's doubled. And then you have an, which is associated with va'et. And then you have the ha'eretz. And so notice the numbering, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the Hebrew word order. That's what that's referring to. Generally speaking, it's going to be in this sequential order, but sometimes it will be in the opposite order. So even though we're reading, and the reason they put it, even though we're reading this left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it is actually written right to left. The first letter is ba. Second word is first word is ba, which is in. The second word is rashi, which is in beginning. Third word is Elohim. The fourth word, so it's written as I wrote in the bottom for you in that order. So that's the first word, second word, third, so forth. That's what those numbers mean. And then you have it repeated at the bottom without the vowels. I'm not sure why that's there. And then it's very, very useful, although it's really hard to understand what these acronyms mean. But if you have this in Logos and you hover over the word, these little abbreviations will show up. The B means for a preposition. So ba is a preposition. Under Reshi, this NCSSFA, this is a noun, common, or excuse me, common noun, singular, female, feminine, in the absolute form. Under Elohim, God, noun, common, masculine, plural, absolute form. This is why I want to do the absolute versus the construct today. And then you have the bara. It's a verb, and it's going to tell you it's a call verb. We're going to do verb later. We're not going to go through the singular, masculine, third person plural, singular. And then you have 8 is a particle. That's what the PA. And then hey is basically it's a definitive article. And then shamayim is a noun, common, masculine, plural, absolute. And then the vav is a conjunction. That's what the C is for. And then the 8 is is a particle again. And then the ha again is the definitive article. And then the eretz is the noun, common, singular, absolute form. And so when you look at the English Hebrew reverse interlinear, it'd be very useful to help grasp what's being said and the grammar associated with it. So you don't have to be a grammatarian. The software will do it for you. Now, this is a picture of Logos. You may have a different software tool. If you have a Hebrew English interlinear, reverse interlinear Bible, it will do something similar. Maybe a little different structure, but it'll do something similar. If you don't have that, you can get hard books. They have none. We may even have in the library. I'm not positive. That does the same thing. It's not as intuitive because the great thing about software is it does almost everything for you. You don't have to, hover over it and it tells you, and so it makes it easier. So I wanted to just get a feel for how to use some of the tools. And let me close in the next 15 minutes with our practical exegesis. Any questions? We can go back. Any questions on the English Hebrew reverse interlinear. I want to just give a picture. We might look at something else later just to help you with the tools, especially with logos. If you don't have a logos, you have something else, accordance or Bible works. They all do the same thing. It's just whether or not you have and most software tools actually come with interlinear Bibles. Now, whether they have a Hebrew English interlinear, reverse interlinear, I don't know. All right, let's look at practical exegesis. What I want to talk about briefly is I won't look so much of a word study, but I'm going to talk about names of God. And obviously not going to talk about all the names of God, because we could do a whole series on all the names of God and the depth behind it and the history, the structure, and the meaning, and this kind of things. But let's look at some of the biblical significance associated with names. In biblical times, names carried significant meaning. When a person was given a new position or a radical change took place in his life, a new name would be given to indicate that new aspect associated with the change in their life. We all know about Abram versus Abraham. Abraham, father of many, Genesis 17, verse 5. And Jacob and his change to Israel, one who strives with God. What was Jacob's life before that? It was, I don't know if I would say he was rebellious, but he certainly wasn't striving to be with God, was he? That makes him rebellious, doesn't it? But when he changed his name, just one to Israel, one who strives with God, or God strives in Genesis 32, verse 28. The name of a person expresses what that person or people or thought people thought the proper description or statement or character of that person. So the name gives them some sort of understanding of the character of the person. Sometimes the Hebrew word for name is shame. You ought to remember that Hebrew word. Name. The Hebrew word for name is shame. Shame, yeah. You don't need to remember it. It's the Shabbat with the Sere underneath it. But yeah, like S-H-A-M-E is how we pronounce it with the final N. But the Hebrew name, shame, the term name, it probably meant like sign or distinctive mark. Today we give our kids names because they mean something personal to us. They sound good, or maybe they have a relative's name, or maybe it's something that just sort of touches our heart or something. But generally speaking, the name is not reflective of the character of the person. But in biblical times, it was. In biblical uses, it correctly describes the person, place, or object and indicates the essential character of that name. For example, Adam or Adam names the animals according to what? To their nature in Genesis chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. Noah means one who brings relief and comfort. Jesus means Savior in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 21. So names had significance in terms of their character. And so when we talk about God's name, there are different ways people characterize it. And so this is just one way. You can look at proper names such as El or Yahweh or Adonai, or in the New Testament, or Theos in the Greek, or Kurios, all meaning God. You look at personal names, Father, Abba, Son, Jesus, the Holy Spirit. Titles such as Creator, Messiah, or Christ, the Paraclete, or the Comforter you find in John chapter 14, 15, 16. And then there are essential names such as light, love, and spirit. God is light. That's an essential name of its character. God is love. God is spirit. Descriptive names such as rock and Baal, and master or Rabboni for Jesus, or shepherd. Attributes, names or virtues or characteristics of the triune Godhead, which we're going to go over tonight. We're not going to go over all these kind of approaches to names, but I do want to focus Old Testament only on El, Yahweh, Adonai, and then some attributes. So we won't go over all this, and we're not over all this. We're not going to do specifically in the New Testament, not tonight anyway. And for the proper name of God, El, the Aleph with the Sere underneath vowel pointing to vowel, and the Lamed El. It's used over 200 times in the Old Testament. It's best translated as God. Both the Hebrews and the Canaanites used El to refer to their deity as strong and powerful. the first and preeminent one. The Canaanites, they had poems about their deities that indicate their strength. There's a poem that goes back to patriarchal times, in 1500 BC time frame. The Epic of Baal, founded at Rosh Hashanah, and it's thought to, and this epic sets forth Baal as the chief hero, but El is referred to numerous times as more powerful and greater than Baal. This El in the Epic of Baal is the father of the gods, the father of Baal, the father of Amat, the father of Mat, the male counterpart, or the father of the male counterpart of the female goddess Asherah, and such. El is also referred to the creator of creatures and of the father of mankind. In the Canaanite deities, he'd be the highest of deities, the king, the ruler, the strong one over all things and people. And interesting enough, this Canaanite god, El, is very likely referred to in the Old Testament. Hosea accuses Judah of unfaithfulness to God because he's still roaming with El. Judah is unfaithful because he's still roaming about with El. Well, El was probably referring to the Canaanite deity. El in the Old Testament describes God's exercising dynamic power as distinguishing from his authority. So it's his power. El speaks of God as the creator, great doer and producer. He's the one who exercises the power, and whatever he does is made and is done and kept and destroyed in his doing. Exodus 15, for example. El is also used to express the idea that God is not to be identified as part of creation, but as the one who is above, behind, and beyond creation, emphasizing his power overall. Psalm 19, verse 1. El, in relation to man, is the crown of his creation. God, as El, is totally over his creation. If you return for time, we won't go there. You'll see that in Hosea 11:9 and Ezekiel 28, verse 12, where God is totally greater than, far beyond any of his creation. Let's look at how El is used as a characteristic of God. It's commonly described in the compound. Now, we won't go over them all, but just as a reference of the various characteristics of God. So, I can't read it over here. Here it is. El Shaddai is God Almighty in Ezekiel 10, verse 15. Da'at, let's see, I can't read this right now. Leon, Da'at Leon is the Most High God in Numbers 24:16. Olam means everlasting, is the everlasting God, Genesis 21. Go'ali, God, my Redeemer. Goel is the Redeemer, and Go'ali is my Redeemer, God, my Redeemer, Job 19. El can also be in the construct state. We talked about, that's why I wanted to make sure we did the construct state. In other words, it's possessive. So it can be God of glory by Al-Hamayim, the God of glory. It could be, and that should be El. I think it's supposed to be El, not the I. So it should be El-Hamayim. I'm going to do a typo there, I'm not sure. Or God of knowledge, El Tarvu, El Tarvu, God of knowledge, for Samuel. Or God of salvation, El, let's see this, Yashuati, God of salvation, Isaiah 12. El can be qualified by an adjective or participle. We haven't done, nor we're going to do adjective or participles in this class, but you can have the great, God is great. El Gadol, Gadol is great. Or El Rahum, God is compassionate, Exodus 34. Or El Naseh, God is forgiving, Psalm 99. Or El Kadna, God is jealous, Exodus 20, verse 5, we know that one. El Ha, God is living, Joshua 3, verse 10. So El is used as a title of God, representing or reflecting his character oftentimes. Well, yes, sir.
Yeshua, is that one of those Yeshua? I know Jesus.
Just Jesus.
Isaiah 12:2. Is that what God of salvation? Is that what we're using? We're using Yeshua. That's what I like.
That is Yeshua. Yeshu. Let's see. Yeshuati, which would be possessive. So it's the God of salvation. I have to look at that. I don't know, but that does sound like Jesus, but I don't think it is. I don't think, but I have to look. I don't really know, to be honest. Someone was making fun of people who say to be honest, because like, what were you before that? That's what Michael was doing in his class last night. He said, and people go, well, can I be honest with you? Where were you before? I was like, and I do that all the time. Well, to be honest, wait a minute, like you were lying just now? Bad hat. Elohim, names for God. Over 2,500 times. Actually, it's used, I think, 2,555 times in the Old Testament. 2,310 of those times, it's the name of the living and true God. But in 245 passages, it seems to be a lowercase g God, Elohim. Some suggest that Elohim is the plural form of El, but more than likely it's the plural form of Elah, which we haven't got to yet, which appears in the poetical writing, the Psalms. Others suggest, and probably I think just the Psalms, others suggest that the plural form indicates the triune nature of God. And support for this is certainly is found in the singular verb used in the plural noun. It's important grammatically. Verbs, the nouns that are singular are going to align with verbs that are singular. But Elohim is plural, and most often it uses a singular noun. So the fact that may reflect a triune nature of God is possible. Also, Elohim is understood as expressing intensity. Genesis 1 and 2, we see Elohim is connected with God's power revealed in his creation. Deuteronomy uses Elohim to stress the majestic power of God towards Israel. And Psalms praises Elohim as the majestic ruler. So probably any one of these could be true. More likely it is the plural of Elah. More likely it does indicate, potentially, the triune nature of God, but it also expresses his intensity and his creative and his power and majestic power and as a majestic ruler. Almost done. Just to think of 2 more slides. Yeah. So, and then I want to look at Yahweh. This is known as, you probably heard the word, tetragrammaton. And it's actually a Greek word. I'm trying to remember exactly what it means now. So if I wrote that down, I don't think I did. Tetragrammaton is actually a Greek word, and I know it means something four letters. I think it's 4 letters. I believe that's what it is. I don't know for sure. By the time of the Septuagint, though, the Tetragrammaton Yahweh, we understand that most times that there was a great reverence and they wouldn't translate it. That wasn't necessarily true early on. That became more and more true during Second Temple Judaism. By the time of the Septuagint, the Jews were translated as Lord, as Adonai. The Septuagint translates the Tetragrammaton Yahweh with the Greek word Kyrios, meaning Lord. The name could be understood as he is becoming, he is or will become, he becomes, he is, he will become, or it could be understood to he causes to be or become. There's a lot you can go into this, which I'm not really qualified to, but I know a little bit, but I don't know if I want to go into it now. I didn't prepare to go into it now. God or Yahweh as a personal relationship with his people is shown by his personal pronouns that are used with it, such as, let's get this I-thou relationship, person to person. Israel is particularly mentioned as having this relationship with him in the various passages I've given you. Yahweh is the God of grace in Exodus 33. And the grammar of Exodus 20, verse 2, for time I won't go there, but it's going to be recorded for you. Exodus 20, verse 2 suggests that the commitment is fixed and immutable. I wrote it down. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. Now, I am the Lord your God, it grammatically gives the depiction or the inference, suggestion that God is immutable, is fixed. Yahweh is eternal. Yahweh is also known as a jealous God in Exodus 20, verse 5, claiming a unique monogamous relationship with his people. It's his desire for exclusivity between God and other persons leaves God. Understand this: the fact that God exclusively wants a relationship with his people, and not share that relationship. He's a jealous God with idols or other things, other idols in our lives. This desire for his exclusivity between God and us leaves God open to suffering. Not only along with those whom he created, you find that in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 through 8, but also because of them, because of our sin, he suffers. And he suffers along with us, his own creation. And he also suffers because of, as you find in Genesis 6, verses 5 through 8, that's the account of the flood. And God was grieved that humanity was so debased. It's also used, Yahweh, I'll skip that. He's pictured as pondering or deliberating over his decisions. God is, Yahweh is in Genesis 3, verse 22, and 8, verse 21, and so forth. So what I wanted to get to is the title Adonai. It's the rarest of the three forms that we've looked at, the Yahweh, the Elohim, and Adonai. It's the rarest of the forms in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, and the Torah. And it is the title or epithet for Adonai or Adon, meaning Lord or Master. And that's where the Septuagint translates Kyrios. It becomes one of the most commonly used, though, during the Second Temple period. And the reason is because they want to show more reverence for and not pronounce the word Yahweh, predominantly because, remember, there was no pointing system. There are no vowels in the text itself. And they actually would lose from what I read, they didn't really know how to pronounce it. And the more and more, it's not that they didn't know how to pronounce it. Out of reverence, they didn't want to pronounce it, and it was resulting in them not knowing how to pronounce it. And so we're not even 100% positive that it's pronounced Yahweh today. But also Adonai, is not specifically or uniquely a divine title for God or Lord. It can be used of humans, indicating persons who have authority, such as in Judges 19 or Genesis 45. Sometimes used to describe God, emphasizing his authority, Joshua 3. Or it's used for Israel. Her God, Yahweh, was the Lord. Is the Lord par excellence. Ha-Adon is what it says in the text, Exodus 23. And also for Israel, the Lord of Lords, Adon Ha-Adon, in Deuteronomy 10 and verse 17. I want to go over these because when you look at Yahweh and Adon, or Adonai, this is how we get the title Jehovah. Jehovah is an English name that's been Latinized. They Latinized Yahweh and Adonai. For the God of Israel is pronunciation. It's the pronunciation of Grammaton, Yahweh. So they changed the pronunciation. Most English translations now render the divine name as Lord. Now, King James uses Jehovah, and some other translations do, but you only use it, I think I'm going on memory, 6 or 11 times, not a whole lot. Typically, most translations will put in Lord in place of Yahweh, and Lord in small caps. Jewish tradition discourages the pronunciation of the divine name as to not take his name in vain. Exodus 20, verse 7, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. But by the Middle Ages, it became Latinized. Yahweh was merged with the pointing system from Adonai, and so we get Jehovah. Now, the J sound is because, I'm going on memory here, I think Latin does not have a Y sound. It has a J sound, and that's why we have Jehovah. And of course, that's what carried forward in the King James. And so it's interesting just to see how that came about. It's not really that significant, but that's it. Wanted to at least give you an idea, not so much a word study, but at least a view of the titles for God, names for God. We might look at some more stuff later in that regard. Sort of mix it up. Any thoughts or questions? Some of you have probably done more studies in that regard than I have. You probably have more information than I do. So if you want to add a thought, we're right on time. I'm always 7 minutes late, so this is perfect. So,
But I'm thinking you said my mind of a Hebrew word, the first 2 letters, olive and bet. That's, if I could take another olive on that, would I have Abba? And that's the word of God, Father.
Abba is an Aramaic word. It's not even Hebrew, it's Aramaic. And it actually means, I'm really going on memory here. I understand it. I haven't looked at this in a long time. I understand it that it's a closer relationship than what we would even say father. It's a much more. It means father, but it's even closer than what we would generally think of and how we would say father. So when Jesus said Abba, Abba, he's talking about in Aramaic this unique and close relationship he had with God the Father.
It would be like us saying daddy.
Daddy.
Yeah.
Or just showing sort of an intimate relationship.
Right.
That they share.
Right. I think they've probably heard that, so I don't need to repeat it. So I wouldn't pray daddy from hope. That's irrelevant. Any other thoughts or questions? Brother Carl, would you lead us?